2007, we are interviewing George Price at his home on West 200 South in Wabash, Indiana. The camera woman is Megan Frick and I'm Ashley Lichtenbarger. George was in World War II and in the Korean War in the Army. In World War II he was in the artillery, and in the Korean War he was in the medical corps. His highest rank was a T sergeant. Okay, George, were you drafted or did you enlist?
I was drafted.
You were drafted, and what year was that?
1944.
Alrighty, where were you living at the time you were drafted?
I was living on Warren Avenue in Wabash, Indiana at that time.
Alright, and what service branch were you drafted into?
Into the Army Artillery.
Okay, and what do you recall about your first days of the service?
Pardon?
Your first days in the service, what do you remember?
Well, I was drafted from Wabash and was taken to Fort Benjamin Harrison, where everybody from this area went at that time. And I was shipped from there to Camp Roberts, California. And I did my basic training in Camp Roberts, California.
Alrighty. Are there any interesting stories about your basic training that you remember?
Oh, probably more than people would like to hear, I suppose. But being an Indiana boy, I was not a farmer, but I did spend summers on the farm, so I was a hick, I suppose. But I liked California very much, and I liked the weather very much. And I got in to basic training with some very unique people. In the barracks where I was billeted, across the street from it in a barracks was Red Skelton, and he was there during the whole time I was training there. So this was unique. I mean, he made us laugh constantly, but by his nature, why, he brought a show there that he either performed in or he did the talent in. And so it was unique. We had a first-class talent show every week, and but when we did at basic training, we did a 5-mile run every Saturday morning, and so with the battery that we were in and the battery that Red Skelton was in, we would either run first and finish, and then his battery would come by, or vice versa. So it was fun in that regard when we got done to wait until, because he never ran. He always walked, and so that took a long time. But also in basic training, I was taught to drive for the first time in my life, and the vehicle I was taught to drive was a tracked vehicle which pulls howitzers, which is the main gun of the artillery, and I was taught to fire a rifle, which I had never had in my hands before. I was taught to fire a pistol, because artillery people at that time, when I went in, that's what you were issued. In fact, when I went overseas, I was issued a pistol. And when I got over there, why, they took the pistol away from me because they weren't using them anymore. But my basic training was first class, really, having all the programs, and Bing Crosby was there many times, and it was, for an 18-year-old kid, it was really exciting.
So you remember it as a good thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you were in World War II and Korea. Where exactly did you go?
Okay. When I left basic training at Camp Roberts, California, they shipped me to Hawaii, and then on to, we were supposed to go to Australia, and the war was really getting bad in the middle of 1944, so our ship did not get to Australia. They stopped us at New Guinea, and I was there for 4 months, maybe something like that. And then I was assigned to the 32nd Division, and we were sent then to Luzon, and I landed in Lingayen Gulf in Luzon, which is the northwest section of the island of Luzon. and I had some experiences, wartime experiences at first, but the major battle I was in there was the Val Verde Trail, which was in northern Luzon. And the reason we had to take it, or the reason we had to fight it, was the main general, Japanese general in northern Luzon was Yamashita, and he was in the area that we were going to, and that was quite an experience in itself, if you can say war is an experience. And I came out of it okay health-wise, so the experience was good experience for me.
Okay. Do you remember arriving and what it was like as an Indiana boy?
The Val Verde Trail mainly.
Just the foreign country in general, just being someplace.
The Filipino people are very, very poor. But they may be better now, but they were very, very poor. And so everything for an 18, 19-year-old kid was a new experience for us. Cockfighting was something, even with the war going on around them. Their people would go to areas where there was cockfighting going on and spend whatever they had, which wasn't much, to bet on the different chickens or roosters that were actually fighting. And I couldn't believe that, you know. They're fighting for the area, and these people just take time off to. So for an 18-year-old kid, that was different. The actual battle itself, my first experience with seeing someone killed was in our first move to the area where the Val Verde Trail was. The engineers came in and put down booby traps to secure a certain area, which were close to our guns. And the division made a real unique move, and the Japanese started heading for the mountains, which is what the Val Verde Trail went into. And when they did, the engineers were called back to remove all those mines so that the vehicles that were pulling the howitzers could move on. And my assignment was to be in that area, and one of the sergeants that had actually helped lay the mines, they had the minefield pretty well cleared, and he must have gotten too, I don't know, he must have moved too fast, or anyway, the mine killed him. And that was my first experience when seeing, and it wasn't really the Japanese doing the shooting, but that left a real lasting impression with me. But that's first and last time I ever saw anything like that happen. The engineers that laid minefields when you needed them were fantastic. And bless this guy's heart, I don't know what happened, but something. And that was quite an experience.
Okay. Well, speaking of casualties, I guess, were there many in your unit?
Yes, there were. The Val Verde Trail was, as it says, a trail along the side of a mountain range, and as you can tell if you're familiar with the word trail, that's pretty difficult to move howitzers. They're very wide, like a truck, and so the engineers had to be called up as we moved along to widen the trail so that the guns could be pulled to where they needed to be. And there were a lot of we used Filipino people, men, well, women sometimes, to carry food supplies, ammo supplies, and that kind of thing, because in that situation, whether it was in Germany or wherever, but in that situation, you just don't know from one day to the next whether you're going to be in that spot for 3 days or a week or 3 hours and out of there. And so you can't have the soldiers that are doing the battle carry the ammo, the food, and that kind of thing. And so my experience there was an awful lot of Filipinos who braved the situation to carry along those narrow trails were killed daily. And I didn't like the looks of that. And then, of course, in the battle, some of my friends were, I had a very horrible experience one night. I won't relate it yet, but it was a bad experience. But one of my friends was killed, and but the battle was the battle. Along the side of the mountain, the Japanese were good about digging caves into the sides of the mountains and then putting a concrete door or whatever. And in this one particular case that I was in, they had evidently built these caves for years, but they had a railroad track from the entry back in. And the howitzer that they had that fired on us daily was on that track, so that they could run it out to the entry of the cave, fire, and then back it in before you could do anything to it. And that was, for an 18, like I say, an 18-year-old kid, that was quite an experience. But my particular job as a forward observer was to get information from a commissioned officer, or to find things that I saw that we needed to do. And we tried to get rid of that gun, and we had an awful lot of losses of life during the days that I was involved with that situation. We were shelled by the gun daily, but it was because the trail was so narrow that you couldn't hide any place. You couldn't get around a corner any place. But the whole trail, the Verde Trail, was that kind of an experience. And when we did get close to Highway 5, where Yamashita, the Japanese general, was, then it was a different kind of life. But our part of the war was over then, and but that was typical. Luzon, that was typical from all the experiences I had in the war. Mountainous, and the Japanese were good, excellent, and they knew how to hide, and they had been building those caves for years, and it was a good experience since I came out of it. Okay.
Right. What are some of your most memorable experiences from while you were in war in Korea or in World War II in the Philippines and Luzon?
You want Korea in here too, do you?
Yeah.
Okay, should be fine. During the Second World War, I have a picture that the Signal Corps took when I was operating my radio as a forward observer. And I'll try to find that. I'm not sure where it is. Cindy probably knows. But that experience where that picture was taken was quite an experience. I had sighted, and we had sighted where the gun emplacement that I'm talking about that was on the railroad track was. And so we had, the commissioned officer and myself, we had set that on so that we could tell the howitzers and our artillery people just where to fire so we could get rid of it. And we worked on that for a long time. But just after that Signal Corps picture was taken, was probably the most horrendous type of that whole battle that I was in. The Japanese evidently were watching all the time, and they pulled that gun out plus several others. They killed a whole pack train of Filipinos that we had carrying ammo to us up there. They lobbed mini shells into the area where I had been for that picture, and so that experience was really something. When I was a forward observer one time, and I don't believe it was in that series, but when I was a forward observer one time, we were up there for about 25 days before we came back. Now, a forward observer, you're up there where the infantry is, which means there's no place to take a bath. You don't eat any cooked food. Everything came out of a can. And so after 25 days of that, why, my artillery group thought a bunch of us that had gone through that experience needed to get a pass to go to Manila. And which, as a geography buff in high school, I thought that was great, but it wasn't great because Manila was really torn up terribly, terribly, terribly. But I told my wife the other night, when we got there, again, now remember we're talking 18, 19-year-old kids, when we got there were Filipino people running around selling ice cream. Well, ice cream? I couldn't believe it. And I told Cindy, I said, I can't believe I really ate that ice cream, because as dirty as the city was and that kind of thing with the war going on, but I did, and it evidently didn't hurt me. But you know, as a kid, you didn't think about that, but that was really something. My experience in the Korean War, when I was at the hospital, they took 7 of us and a commissioned officer from the replacement depot in Tokyo down to Nara, Japan, which is just north and northeast of Osaka, Japan. And they sent us to a camping area where the 25th Division had been before they had been sent to Korea, and which was just barracks and that type of thing. So they had to bring in Japanese people to get it ready to make a hospital out of it, and bring in beds and equipment, the physical therapists. That's what I was going to be. And after they got it ready for the hospital, they brought us 4 patients from Osaka General Hospital, 4 patients. There were, like I said, there were several non-commissioned officers, and then there was one captain, one commissioned officer that started the hospital. 2 weeks later, I think they brought us our first patient about 1 o'clock in the morning, just after midnight on a Thursday, I think it was. That's when we got our 4. 2 weeks later, 2 weekends later, we had 1,900 patients in that hospital. Needless to say, only 8 of us made a lot of work, and the captain got busy getting people that had good enough health out of the casualty people that we had, where we could use them to help us. I mean, I could supervise somebody to do activities with other soldiers and that kind of thing. But now for a kid that was only 24 at that time, that, you know, I wasn't a hospital trained person, but to go from 4 patients to 1,900 patients, quite an experience. And needless to say, we worked until we got relief. We worked around the clock, 24-hour shift, and then you were off 3 or 4 hours, and then another 24-hour shift because they needed you. I mean, 1,900 patients is a lot of people, and many of the patients were from the Korean War or frostbite, and they had established a hospital in Michigan to fly all the frostbite extreme cases to, but a lot of them, because they were getting so many from Korea, that they had to give us ideas, and then we experimented with those ideas, and they were people that had 2 or 3 fingers frozen, and we had to try to get those 2 or 3 fingers back to some kind of normalcy. And in many cases, those frostbite cases would go to Osaka General, and they didn't have anything that they could do because there's no operation at that time that they were performing. So they'd send them to us, and I'm sure that's why we got so many patients at one time. But that was sad, but it was quite an experience. And then we would have patients. I had one young boy from Horseheads, New York, that came to me. He had lied about his age. He really wasn't old enough to be there when I had him as a patient in the hospital. He was that young, but he wanted to be in the war, and he was an excellent rifleman, and he was in the infantry, and he had his left shoulder shot almost completely away. And like I say, I wasn't medically trained. I wasn't IU med school trained type person. And this kid, he said, "Sergeant Price, I want you to fix me up. I won't go back." And I said, "You don't have any business going back, because when you take the bandages off to help him do something and then put new ones back on, there wasn't enough shoulder left." I mean, in today's world, and probably then, you know, eventually he got built up on his shoulder, you know, marvelous things they can do in medicine today. But, and I just held on to him, and I talked him into staying there with us and having him work with some patients, because if nothing else, it's how a person can really get hurt and still want to go back and fight, when there are some guys that ended up with not too bad of an injury and didn't want to go back. They wanted me to keep him as long as I could. And so he was good morale-wise from that standpoint, but we had a lot of patients that lost fingers, lost hands, and when they come to you in that category, they wanted them to go back because they needed help in Korea, and you had to do your best to get them, you know. Otherwise, you had to turn them in as this person can't. And but that was an experience for me, because no more at the start of it, no more than I knew in physical therapy, I was really pleased in the year's time that I was there to see the people that I really had helped. And that was quite an experience. I enjoyed that tremendously. Don't know if I'd want to do it again, but I liked it.
Okay.
Had an opportunity when I came home. I'm from Wabash, Indiana, and they discharged me at the Korean War. I told the lieutenant that interviewed me, I said, "I can't believe I'm from Indiana. What am I doing clear out here in Colorado getting discharged?" Well, that's the way it was then. But he offered me a chance to go to Fort Sam Houston in Texas, where they had a tremendous hospital at that time. I don't know what's there now, where they worked on boys, men that had come back from the Korean War, that because there were an awful lot of frostbite cases that never got better, injury cases like the one I had. I didn't take it because I was a school teacher and wanted to go back. And I don't know what my experience would have been if I'd have taken him up on it. I'd have probably seen an awful lot of people I'd had as patients before, probably.
So how did you end up being in the medical corps?
When I was at Ball State, after I came back in 1946, I went to Ball State because all my life I'd always wanted to be a teacher. And when I got back in the summer of '46, why, I got help trying to get enrolled at Ball State, and they had so many veterans come back that I didn't think because I was so late getting back. Because Ball State started early. And but I had help from 2 teachers in Wabash to get in. They encouraged me to take PE, and many men at that time were, most of the veterans that came back to Ball State at that time, PE was one of their major areas because they wanted to coach more than anything. And but I took the PE as an area, and I took industrial arts as an area, and I took elementary ed as an area. So I had 3 areas that I was taking. But in the PE, the man that I became friends with that was on the staff said, "George, you really ought to take the spatial area that we give, and then you'll have anatomy, physiology, kinesiology, and that kind of stuff." And I said, "Okay, can I get it in with, and they'll keep these majors?" Yep. And so that background, when I went to the Korean War, evidently was just what they wanted to make me a candidate for. Kinesiology and anatomy would certainly help you as a physical therapist. There's no question about that, because you learn about muscles and where they are. But my brother had graduated from Wabash, gone to IU as a pre-med student, and so he and I talked an awful lot, and I told him I wasn't interested in medical. He said he wasn't interested in teaching, so we both went our different ways. But I suppose when they advised me about the PE thing and taking the specialist classes, that I probably learned more about medicine then than. So anyway.
Okay. Were you awarded any medals or citations for your experience?
Just the normal ones, the Good Conduct Ribbon, the Bronze Stars with where battles were involved in the Pacific, in Luzon, then the occupation of Japan after. When we finished and our division captured General Yamashita in northern Luzon, they took him, our division people took him back to Manila as a prisoner of war. And they started training us at that time for landing in Japan. And we trained for several months, and then they dropped the atom bombs, and it never happened, of course. But still at the same time, the various divisions that were in Luzon that were going to land in Japan were ordered to go to Japan for occupation duty to start with. So our particular 32nd Division was going to go to Sasebo, and so that's where they had us land. The waters there in Sasebo Bay were so mined that they had to bring in minesweepers, and then only one ship could go in and unload and come out before the next ship went in. So it wasn't, we stayed in the water quite a while. It wasn't easy in, easy off type thing. But then they moved us on up to the northern part of Kyushu Island, where our division was going to do deactivating work for. In our particular division, 32nd, was to go to Beppu and Oita, and we were to take care of factories and there were quite a few around there that had been making airplanes and airplane parts. The barracks that we took over had been there, like our West Point of that time, where they trained their military officers, and the city areas around there had factories that had made parts for war. Anything that had to do with war, we had to destroy. If it was something that could be used for peacetime, why, they brought Japanese people in, took stuff out. That was a couple months, 2.5 months maybe, of an experience. Just recently, my son had a chance to go to Japan, so he asked me, he said, "Dad, you want to take me and go with me and show me where you..." So I showed him where I was for the Korean War in Nara, Japan, because his meeting was in Osaka. But that's an experience. I mean, when I went to the Korean War, he was only 2 years old. So when you take him back, you're much older and he's much older, but when you take him back and show him where you'd been, it's quite an experience.
Yeah. Did you have plenty of supplies while you were in...
Yeah, that was an experience in the Second World War. That was an experience that I had to tell my kids as they got older. Because when I got home from the Second World War, the first thing I wanted to do was buy my own radio. Can you imagine that in today's world? And I did. I spent every cent I had to buy my own radio. But when I was over there during the Second World War, and we were on the Villa Verde Trail especially, I was a radio operator and had to carry my extra batteries for radio and that kind of thing. But it was so difficult with the power of the radios that we had to be able to talk to the guns even, that sometimes I had to get away from the mountainside, out away even from the trail, which meant the Japanese could see me, because of the power of the radio itself. You know, even if you had a brand new battery in, you know, that kind of thing. And I used to tell the kids that all I could dream about was, boy, when I get home, I'm going to buy a radio, because then I can hear music from wherever, you know, that kind of supplies. They did, yeah, excellent job, I thought. And I always have been a cook. My dad and mom did a good job of teaching me how to cook. And so when I was in the Second World War, I could get cocoa powder and coffee and things from the guys in the field kitchens when I was overseas, I'm talking about. And so she sent me a Coleman 2-burner stove, and it took me a long time to get it, but when I finally got it, why, they adapted it so the field kitchens in the Second World War used what they called white gas, okay? I suppose it'd be kerosene or something like that today, you know, called. But anyway, the 2-burner Coleman stove that Mom sent me, I got the gas from the, and Mom would send me in a box, you know, cookies, and then she'd have some packages of cocoa powder or coffee or something. So in my tent, almost from the start, when I was in the back area, now when I was in forward observer, but when I was in the back area, people would come midnight when they were on duty, off duty, and get cocoa or coffee or something like that, because my stove worked all the time. And that was kind of neat.
That is. That's very nice. Is there something that you did especially for good luck? Or something that you had?
For good luck? Well, I don't know that I would interpret. I'm a Christian kid. I was raised in the Christian church, and I'd go to chapel every time, and in the front lines like that, every time there was a major battle or something, there would be, the chaplain would have a special service, and I'd go to all of them. And on the ship, traveling over and traveling home, and all my experiences. So I don't know that I did that for good luck, but I did that for, made me feel better, and that's all I know. So.
Okay. When you got leave while you were in the service in the war, when you were on leave, what did you do?
Okay. Basic training in California, Camp Roberts, California, is halfway between LA and San Francisco. And one of the Wabash guys that I went to basic training with, he had an aunt in San Francisco. So every time I could get a weekend pass, I went to San Francisco. I never took any weekend passes to LA. So I was in San Francisco, I don't know how many times, a lot. And the guys from Wabash would usually go, get a pass the same weekend I went. It was in the Korean War, because of our duty, nature of our duty. Every once in a while they would give us a special 3-day pass, and we'd go to Yokohama or Tokyo or Osaka. Didn't need a 3-day pass to go to Osaka because that was pretty close to Nara where we were. But when I was in Nara at the hospital, passes were not easy to come by because of the number of patients that we ended up having constantly. So I'd go into Nara almost every Sunday morning after chapel, and Nara has a big park area. It was their first national capital before Tokyo, and they have a big park area, and the deer that are there are domesticated, and you don't hurt them. In fact, they walk up to you and want you to feed them. But in that park was a Japanese store, restaurant type thing. And because of just who I was, I suppose, I'd go after chapel, I'd go to that park restaurant and eat breakfast. I called it breakfast. It was late in the morning, really. But I loved that. And their specialty was frog legs. I don't know, all my life I'd eaten a lot of turtle and rabbits and that kind of thing. I don't know how much experience I had in frog legs, but they were delicious. So when they see me come, Sergeant Price wants frog legs. Yep, he wants frog legs. But that was unique. For me, it was unique. Somebody else would have, hey, that isn't my way to spend a Sunday morning. But that was great. And we traveled, like I say, to all the cities were really destroyed. Tokyo was in terrible, terrible shape at that time. And we went through Nagasaki, and because when we were up there, it wasn't really that long after the atomic bomb was blown, and Hiroshima. And
do you recall any particularly humorous events?
Pardon?
Do you recall any humorous events that stick out?
No.
Okay. Did you keep any personal diaries while you were away?
Picture diaries from the wars or experiences. My mom did, and then I don't. Some of the pictures that I had sent her, things that I had sent her, I don't write. I don't really know. We have some that we have, but I know my brother was in England flying on a B-24, so she had a book of his and a book of mine type thing. But I have pictures from the war, but I don't have any ways near what she had. But that's a mom, you know. She wants you when you're 2 and that kind of thing, and so. But I can recall a number of things, and then like I say, this last visit back to Japan, I was certainly surprised I could remember some of the things. I would like to go to the Philippines again. I would like to go to the area of Luzon where we were with the Valverde Trail. Don't know if I'll ever get there, but I had an exceptional experience on the time that I was in the Second World War. Our first experience here before the Valverde Trail was in a river basin, and we had at that time the artillery had a Cub type airplane, like it flies out of the Wabash airport, single.
Mm-hmm.
And but that was used a lot of times to help a forward observer. They would fly up and say Japanese troop movement there, and that gun emplacement there, and that kind of thing. And so we had to take turns guarding that area because the Japanese would come in and destroy the plane. And while I was there, a Filipino minister came to talk to me. He said, "I've seen you here several times." And I sat down and I started talking to him when I could, and found out that he was a preacher there. And so we carried that on. I wasn't home yet, so he sent letters back to my mom and dad to tell about experience that he had. And I have quite a few letters from him, but that, it's just a sidelight from a war that you pick up meet somebody like that. And I suppose he was probably 30 years old, which was old to me because I was only 18 or 19. So. But I'm sure he wasn't that much older than I am. But that was unique.
All right, well, we'll go on to, I guess, after your military career. Do you remember the day that your service ended?
That what?
That your service ended?
Well, Second World War, no, I can't. I was so interested in, I had been corresponding with people to get into Ball State, and I don't, other than getting excited about getting out so I could get in school, I don't really remember that much about it. The ending of the Korean War, I do, because of being there at Fort Carson, Colorado, being so far from home, which seemed strange, let me out here, but they were going to pay for my train trip back. So, and then the experience that I had there with the captain, lieutenant, whatever he was, that wanted me to go to Fort Sam Houston. So that was unique, that kind of thing. I can't even tell you how many days it took me to get home on the train. I don't really. From the Korean War, I mean.
Mm-hmm. What did you do in the weeks after you got home?
Okay, as I say, at the end of the Second World War, it was just, I bought my radio. That was a must. And, but I spent a lot of time on the road getting down to Muncie to try to get classes to get in, because Ball State at that time, the year before I got there in the fall of '46. When Ball State finished school in the spring of '46, they had around 800 students. It was in that area someplace. When I got there in the fall of '46, they had 1,200 new freshmen. They had more freshmen, but it was, practically all of us were veterans back from the service. So the school all of a sudden went from a 800 enrollment to a almost 2,000 type. And heaven only knows what it is now. It's big now.
Yeah.
I mean, but that was when it was a teacher's college. So.
Did you make any close friendships while you were in the service?
Yes, I did. During the Second World War, I remember I went down to Indianapolis to take my physical because I was being drafted, and there were a line, really a line, and the kid, or we were kids, so the kid right behind me and I struck up a friendship, just talk. And he was from, not Brazil, Clay City, Indiana. And so I said, well, good luck to you, after we got our physical, got out of there. He started his way home. Clay City's over by Terre Haute, and we came north. And so when I got my papers to be drafted and headed down to Fort Benjamin Harrison, lo and behold, there Bill was. And so when it was time to leave Fort Benjamin Harrison to go to Camp Roberts, California, there Bill was. And when I got into the artillery training at Roberts, at Camp Roberts, and we got the first experience in training with the guns and that kind of thing, there he was. And so I just struck up a friendship, you know, we got to go to PX and have a milkshake, or we got to have something. And so we just talk, and I'd tell my folks about him, and he'd tell his folks about me. And so then after we finished at Camp Roberts, and we each everybody got to go home for about 10 days before we were shipped overseas. And I got back to the replacement depot in California. There he was. And so we got shipped over, and when we got assigned to the 32nd Division, there he was. It was unique, really. And so after we got home, we have always exchanged Christmas cards. And when he got married, he sent me word about it. When I got married, I sent him word about it. When I graduated from Ball State. And we still correspond today. Cindy and I have been down there 2 or 3 times to visit him. He's had a bad health problem the last 2 or 3 years, but really, really unique. You know, there were, in that line getting physical, there were quite a few guys from Wabash, and not all of them did I end up going all these different places with, but this fellow was right behind me. It was unique too, because when we were in that line, the Army took so many people, the Navy took so many people, the Marines took so many people. And he was a big scrappy guy, healthy as can be. And so when they came out to read, you know, the Army wants you, the Navy wants you, or whatever, they talked to Bill and they said, the Marines want you. And he said, I don't want to go to the Marines. And so we redid that, and then they told him, and he chose on it. You know, I hadn't talked to him about anything. At the time, he didn't know where I was going, but he chose the Army, and because if he'd have taken the Marines, of course, we'd have never seen each other after that day, probably. Wow. Good Lord was working on somebody's side, you know, that type of thing. So it was a friendship that just really developed great. We weren't in the, I was in 120th Field Artillery, Headquarters Battalion, and he was in the 126th, I think, Field Artillery, but he was in charge of a gun, and I was with the Headquarters Battery of my battalion, and I was communication, I was radio, forward observer. So there were times, a lot of times during a battle that I never saw him, because he was always back with the guns. Mm-hmm. And but quite an experience.
Did you join any veterans organizations?
No. And I can't tell you why. I don't have a thing against them. I just didn't.
Okay. How do you think your military experiences affected your life after service?
My military experiences would have affected me. I don't know, you can only suppose, but I think one thing, I think this way before, because my brother was he was a year and a half older than I, and he had a lot of smarts, as the saying goes. And Bill told me that this was a good country, and this before anybody was in a war or anything of the sort. And he and I always were history and geography people, and but I always believed that this country, even if you have to pay taxes, even if you have to do a lot of things you don't want to do. And that got proven to me when I went overseas. I didn't go to Europe to battle, but Bill did. He went to England. But my experience was I still believe in this country, good or bad, and I don't like to pay taxes any more than anybody else. But when you consider what I get for the taxes I pay, not a bad deal as far as I'm concerned. So I think that came home more to me from my experience. And like I say, my brother was killed in the Second World War. He was a radio operator on a B-24 out of England with the 8th Air Force. And but so I had a different experience than he had from that standpoint. But by the same token, I think my love of country is a lot stronger. My love of family is certainly a lot stronger because I saw what my mom and dad went through losing my brother. And that's always been something I've taught my kids. My brother was 20 years old when he was killed. And back in those days, my brother was killed when he was 20 and hadn't yet reached the age where he could vote. And so I think people that don't want to go vote or people that complain about the country, yeah, I think I learned, if I didn't already know it, I learned a definite lesson there that country isn't as bad as you make it out sometimes. And Cindy and I travel. Well, we travel a lot. We've been to almost every state, and we've been to England, and we've been to France, and we come home saying the same thing. It's a lot of things you can see bad that we don't do right sometimes, but by the same token, a lot of countries have rough times and bad people and so on. So we learned it.
Okay. And did your military experience influence the way that you thought about war and what you thought of war?
I don't like war, didn't like war in the first place. I've had discussions with many of my kids and my grandkids, but I think the war, I grew up in an era where the Second World War, a bunch of us thought Second World War was a thing that was pushed on us. May not have happened that way, but you know, you grew up thinking everybody's going to go to the service. That's just the way it's going to be. And but I don't know. I think there would be a lot of things they can do besides fight a war. Sit down and talk. If it takes you 10 years, that's better than killing people over 10 years. So.
Right. Right. Is there anything else you'd like to add that we haven't covered?
No, I don't think so. I think I have 7 children that I call children, and I have 17 grandchildren, and I tell them the same story almost every Christmas, that country they live in is a pretty good country.
Alrighty. Thank you very much.
You bet.